The goal of this talk is to introduce some new learning and memory techniques. I'm hoping you'll find them fun and interesting. It's not too serious, and that you'll want to try them out. So why this talk? Well, learning in general has been fascinating to me, has always been fascinating to me. These days, I've had to ask myself what we still need to learn and actually remember. When I chatted with AI about it, the bots reminded me that curiosity and creativity, which are both supported by learning and memorization, are more relevant than ever. So what we'll explore in the talk, the state of learning today, and how we got stuck on a narrow way of learning, which is mostly just in the form of text, and how multimodal memory techniques can broaden how we learn, make it more fun and efficient. So I'll start with my story. A while back, I discovered the second brain methodology of note-taking. The goal of a second brain is to create a digital network of knowledge, and that's done by connecting notes. The more notes you create and link together using backlinks, the more your network of nodes expands, and frankly, the results just look really cool. So I did just that. I made summaries of books, articles, podcasts. I was proud of myself for being a human summarizer. I read and reread my handcrafted notes, but didn't notice myself being able to recall things that well or at all, given how much time I spent with this stuff. So you could say I hit a wall. I hit a wall of text. I wasn't even close to being a kick-ass walking encyclopedia. So looking back, by reading and rereading my notes, I was essentially trying to learn by rote. And from one source I found, rote learning takes up to 160 repetitions. And I think it's because our brains reserve resources for interesting events. They're primarily concerned with survival. Just exposure to abstract concepts, in text form especially, isn't nearly interesting enough to take up precious mental space. So clearly that wasn't working. So my new approach was to start drawing pictures of concepts I was trying to learn. As we all know, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I was able to remember things a lot better. I also remembered that 50% of our brains are involved in visual processing, and that's a huge amount of brain capacity I wasn't really utilizing before. So as I dug further with these topics, I uncovered memory techniques that were used by the ancient Greeks and Romans. They were able to remember impressive amounts of information. They gave speeches from memory, engaged in lively debate, and demonstrated the potential of human memory. Books weren't prevalent, so the main place human knowledge was stored was in people's heads. So why is text the default now? Well, it's convenient, it's storage friendly, and it's just how we communicate now. Conversations start in Slack or email, and then we make things official with Google Docs or other text collaboration platforms. Let's take a conversation with ChatGPT, for example. Text goes in as a question, and we get an answer in text. But what about the in-between bits? The thought processes behind coming up with the question and how we process the answer. So I see text as the end result, but I think it's a handicap to think only in text. So let's lay the groundwork for enhancing our memories and learning better as a result. We'll first get in touch with our imaginative powers. By that, I mean conjuring something in the mind, usually associated with one of the five senses. So associating what we're trying to learn with one or more of the senses creates a richer, more vivid learning experience. A significant part of the visual part of our brains can remember faces in great detail. So faces can be great learning aids. We also tend to remember momentous times in our lives. So this is a picture of my nephew who was born in 2005, and I'm sure you can imagine he doesn't look like that anymore. Another sense, as it were, is a spatial memory. Our brains are evolved to remember locations of important resources. A Greek poet in the 6th century BC used this fact to his advantage. He was having dinner with colleagues. He left the building, and the next thing he knew, the building collapsed, killing everyone inside. He noticed later, after he kind of got over what happened, that he was able to recall each person's locations perfectly, and he didn't make any effort to do so beforehand. And this is the origin story of the method of loci, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But let's start with mnemonics as a memory technique. So we're going to use our imaginative powers. I'm sure you're familiar with these, and they're any conceptual device that helps us remember something. So the way I learned to remember which months have 30 days is through song. You know, the 30 days have September, April, June, and November. So that utilizes our auditory imagination. I can just call it up in my head. Oh yeah. So that stuck with me really well, but we can also condense it into an acronym. So there's only 4 months that have the 30 days, so why not just remember those 4, put them in a nice little acronym, Sanjay. And if you're familiar with that soy sauce, we're adding a little taste to the mnemonic. And there's one more way to remember the months, which months have 30 days. It's this visual and tactile technique. You use your knuckles, and if you're on the knuckle, it's 31 days, and if it's in between, it has either 28 or 30 days. So these mnemonics all engage our senses, which make it easier to remember what we're trying to remember. The next technique, elaborative encoding. This is a scary sounding sciencey word. Thank you, Amita. But it uses mnemonics, and I'll walk you through it. So by elaborating new information with what's already established, it becomes easier to learn and recall this new information. So the idea is we want to link the new to the old. So this link is something we already know, we can recall it easily, and we can somehow come up with a conceptual relationship to the new thing. The more sensory, vivid, wild, outlandish it is, the more effective it will be. This augmenting process makes it something our brain will be much more likely to pay attention to, latch on, and remember. So let's see an example of this, because this is a bit abstract. So I wanted to commit to memory what the 4 words of the C4 model for visualizing software architecture were. Like, I always got it confused. Was it context, container, whatever? So just to give you a little background on this diagramming philosophy, you can provide context, which is the most zoomed out diagram, and it's the user context. Why does the system exist to begin with? So it's very zoomed out. And then we zoom into containers, then zoom in more to components, and then finally the most zoomed in we can get is like, you know, actually providing code in a diagram. So I think this visual is good to just give you an overview, but to me it wasn't memorable enough, wasn't concrete enough. So here's how I encoded it. So the first word, context, it sounds like Kant text to me. So this is a German philosopher, Immanuel Kant. And so that picture of him, he's the user of our system. And I think that's kind of weird and wild and outlandish. So that kind of helps me remember it. And he wrote a lot of very large volume texts. So context is our entry point here. And then the next word, container, well, again, it starts with Kant. So I'm going to use him again. And this time he's got like a milkshake or something. He's got a container of something. And then the next C word, component. Well, I thought component, computer, parts, like components of my computer. Now we're kind of zooming in. So that kind of stuck with me. That felt more concrete. And then finally, code. I didn't abstract it too much. It's just code on a monitor. I look at code a lot, so it's concrete to me. So, okay, that's all well and good. And you're probably asking, well, like, how do I remember sets of concepts? How do I remember them in order? So I hinted at the method of loci. In other words, walking through a memory palace. So this is one of the ancient memory techniques, and memory experts use it today. Um, so it is a strategy for memory enhancement, which uses visualizations of familiar spatial environments in order to enhance the recall of information. So starting with this upper left box, you make a memory palace, and we'll talk about what goes into that. Then you define a path through it. That's important because you always take the same path. If you kind of went willy-nilly, it'd be harder to remember and recall. You encode the list. We just talked about encoding. That's, kind of chunking the concept into something smaller and then adding those elaborations. And then finally, you take that same path and you recall the list. So this is all a mental exercise, and maybe drawing could help you do this. So let's go into this imaginary mental palace. It doesn't even have to be a real place. So here's one I found. You walk in the door, you go to the TV, that's the first step. Couch is the second step. Coffee table is the third. Easy chair is the fourth, etc. That's the defined path through this living room. So let's put the C4 concepts in the living room. So I walk in the door and I look left. I'm kind of using this memory palace spatially. And I'm like, oh, the TV's on. That's weird. There's a documentary playing. Oh, it's about Kant, and it's about him writing his most famous work. So since I know the TV set is first in this memory palace, that's my entry point. And then afterwards, like, it's Kant again. He's on my couch. That's crazy. And he's just like sipping a milkshake. I think he's like tired from having filmed that documentary or something. But then I look at the coffee table. I'm like, whoa, there's parts of my computer everywhere. I think it's because he was fascinated by this technology and took it apart, was trying to learn it. And then finally the fourth, the easy chair. Oh, he left the monitor and there's some code up. It's like error, error, error or something. I got to put this computer back together. So this is a very elaborate and silly visual to remember just 4 words. But if you imagine putting a lot more information in here, it really works. So back to choosing memory palaces. If you find this useful, it's handy to have a large collection of memory palaces. A good starting place is any place you're familiar with, your childhood home. Like you grew up there. I'm assuming you stayed there for a long time. Just some place you grew up in. Another good choice is a place you associate with learning. So any school you went to, my coding boot camp has been an effective one for me. It doesn't have to be a building. It could be a street route. Like if you take the same walk every day and you know a bunch of landmarks, that could be a memory palace. Famous places, you don't even have to have been there. You can just easily find pictures of one. You can make up a place. Like that living room's made up. You can use it. And yeah, just all in all, should just have interesting spatial qualities and points of interest that you can place things you want to remember in. So wrapping up, I think learning this way is fun, engaging, and motivating. It's personalized and creative, which I really like, and it's not just text on a page or screen. When I was in school, I don't recall learning how to learn this way, and this would have been really helpful for me. So I think you'll learn faster by drawing, generating mnemonics, and using a memory palace. So you'll use more of your brain, hopefully more than 50%. You'll spend less time rereading. And since a picture is worth 1,000 words, maybe it's 1,000 times more efficient. I don't know. I'll let you judge. So that's the end of the spiel. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them now. I've also got a bunch of I recommend this book if you are into this topic. And I have some FAQs if we have time and want to have a discussion. But yeah, I'll just open it up.